Okay, today we are moving into Pluto in the 4th house. And I have prepared some slides to talk about this. And originally the person whose chart I was going to use couldn't make it, which is fine because I think there's plenty of material. But I may ask from time to time if anybody wants to share. I know we have at least one Pluto in the 4th person here with us live, which could be helpful. And I will say I don't have Pluto in the 4th, but I have Saturn in the 4th with Mercury and the Sun, and they're all in Cancer, and I have Venus in Cancer on the cusp of the 4th house. So it's not exactly the same, but the flavor of the 4th house and Cancer is something that I'm very personally familiar with. So let's get into it. First, kind of regrouping on what Pluto represents in evolutionary astrology. Pluto is the facet of the soul most recently and currently focused on. And the reason that I word it this way instead of just saying that Pluto is the soul is I feel that that's a little bit too limiting. So it might be semantics here, but I prefer to look at it as the facet of our soul that we've really been intent on growing through or experiencing through. So it really is what we've been going for again and again that's become very ingrained in our deepest desire, which leads to the second point of Pluto in EA, and that is that it represents the soul's desire. And for me, the ultimate soul's desire is how we are wanting to experience ourselves. So I look at the soul in some ways as not being able to define it, and it's complete. But when we come and incarnate onto Earth, for example, we're wanting to experience ourselves in a particular way. And so the Pluto placement and aspects and different pieces of the chart that touch that show us how we're truly wanting to experience ourselves. And then Pluto also points directly to the soul's evolution. So it's the how the soul has been evolving. So if it's in the 1st house, that's the area that it's been evolving through. And again, to me, the evolution is always happening. So we are always evolving. And Pluto is representing the soul in its transformation of evolution. In addition, Pluto represents our deepest obsessions, compulsions, motivations, our power struggles, and because the Pluto part of us that it represents is not oftentimes very conscious, there is this deep, deep pulling towards something, and if we're not conscious of what is trying to be experienced or be brought out or be felt or be seen or understood, then it kind of comes as these huge waves of compulsion without a very easy ability to track it with the head. Another piece that Pluto represents is our perceived sense of lack. It's that area where we feel like if we just got X more, things would be okay. Or if we just had, this huge void that we feel in ourselves completed, that we would be okay. It's the perspective or the perception of I'm not enough or I'm lacking something. So this comes, of course, with a sense of powerlessness, and Pluto representing power. In order to experience power, we're running the whole gamut of power games, from powerless to powerful to abusing power. All these pieces here, but all of that is coming out because we have a perceived sense of lack. There's something that we feel that we just can never fill the void well enough. Pluto also represents our shadow in the underworld. I think it's especially interesting, we're talking about Pluto in the 4th house today, that we have the Dark Lord in the darkest part of the chart or of ourselves. That is a tremendous amount of darkness. So a big part of Pluto is us learning to be comfortable in our darkness, so we can start to really feel around and bring light into it. Also, I like this. Nunu Michaels teaches that Pluto represents how we draw power against life or the power to allow life. And we can see by where we are in our own behaviors, our own relationships with ourselves and others, really where we're at with that dynamic. But that very much makes sense to me. The area that Pluto's in shows where we have this tremendous amount of power. But whether we use it to perpetuate our belief that we're not enough and that we're lacking, and that we're powerless, or that we can't get that piece right, that's how we draw power against life. You know, no, I won't go there. But in the same vein, we can take that same energy, and that's where we truly can regenerate ourselves, have whole rebirths within that area of life. So Pluto's placement by house. It's the chosen classroom from which to experience the soul's evolution. So where do I want to explore myself, experiencing myself in this lifetime or past lifetimes? And the chosen nature through which to experience the soul's evolution. So I think it's always helpful for me, and this may be my own personal thing, but it also may apply to others, that it's not just the soul's evolution in its entirety, it's the classroom and the nature through which we are having the experience of our evolution. Because again, evolution is happening whether or not I sit on the back porch and never get off of it. You know, evolution is going to happen regardless of what I do. And the house placement of Pluto shows the archetype that we most deeply desire to empower within us. Because what does Pluto want ultimately? To empower us, to power us up, to eliminate anything that stands in our way of being in our full power. And to me, my empowered in myself or being in my full power means me being me at the deepest level of me. Okay, the fourth house, tons of words on here. And, you know, the slides will be available later, but ultimately the fourth house, the crux, the foundation, the place where the entire chart rests. My teacher, Laura Nalbandian, would always say it's the ballast, you know, and if you don't have anything in the ballast, you know, and anything comes and hits the top, you know, you're going to tumble right over. So when I think of the fourth house, I think about the ultimate foundation of me within myself. And even though we call it the roots, I think of it less of a rooting down into something and more of a rooting into the center of my being. So I think about, in some ways, the center of the self sitting in that fourth house. And so it is the darkest part of the chart. You know, it would be midnight, correlating with hours. And so we can't see at that time. So we're meant to form things in the dark. We're meant to form them from within ourselves. To me, that dark represents just the need to go within versus to look at the shiny thing off in the distance or across from me. So Pluto in the fourth is going deep within the self. So we know that Aries represents in part our life force. And that's how we kick off the wheel of experience. So that first house has a lot to do with identity and our life force, our spark of who we are. So we initiate, you know, we move into life. And then in Taurus, we come to be rooted in the body and in the senses. And we have a sense of solidity or stability in ourself. You know, whereas Aries being this cardinal energy just running in a straight line, which would not be sustainable, then Taurus moves it into the circle. And now we have some concentration. Then we bring the mind, or Gemini, where we are now receiving our environment and learning. But all of these first three coalesce into an identity. And the fourth house in Cancer ultimately is about forming our identity. And we form our identity through emotion. So I have been, well, truly, I spend a lot of time thinking and feeling and just existing in the fourth house because my own wiring sits there so much. But in some ways, I feel like the fourth house ultimately is such a house of humanity, so much of our human experience, because it is where emotion comes in. And to me, emotion truly is our reactions to ourselves and to life. And that's what it is to be human. You know, we are creating a self to actually react to. So our self is the reaction to life, and especially our reaction to what we are, represented by Aries, our feelings and sensations that come in Taurus, and then our history, story, and thoughts, which is Gemini. So we have all these things going on, and prior to the fourth house in Cancer, you know, we don't really have an awareness outside. You know, we're just doing it. So Cancer comes, and all of a sudden, for the first time, we start to react to not only to the things around us, but to our own self. So I feel truly this part of us, it's reacting and responding to ourselves. That is the self-identity or the ego. So in the fourth house, we're each looking for a self to feel ourselves with. So anything that we have in the fourth house or in Cancer, there's going to be part of this dynamic there. It's just part of the archetype. And I'm not saying it's the entire archetype, but it's a big piece of it. So whether you have a planet there, a node there, something prominent with it, there's going to be this need to develop the identity, to develop who I am in an ego sense. So Pluto in the fourth house. So now we move all those things together. Everything that we know about Pluto, we take Pluto in the fourth house. The fourth house is the Cancer archetype. And now let's look at the soul's desire in that fourth house with the Cancer archetype. I think the ultimate desire here is to experience the self as the anchor or the root or the center. So, and this is simple to say, and this is not easy to do, because we're talking about the world of emotion. No, the fourth house is not only the family that we're born into, it's everything we're born into, including our body, our psychological makeup. It's the stuff that we get, the stuff that we just are. And that's not always easy to sit with what we've come in with or come into. You know, it's not like the fifth house where that's the family or the thing that we're creating. The fourth house is what we came in with, in our blood and our bones and our genetics and our, you know, all those pieces. So the ultimate soul's desire with Pluto in the fourth is to experience emotional security that is not dependent upon anything external. And Pluto in the fourth house generally wants to go external to get its emotional needs met. You know, and so it attracts experiences, oftentimes that are very traumatic, around emotions and feelings or family, deep bonded connections with people that then push it back in upon itself. And when we think about the fourth house as representative of home, ultimately the soul's desire is to experience the self at home. You know, not only at home, but in the home of self and experiencing oneself as home, which would mean no matter where one would go, home would be with it, which is, we all know this is, you know, the shell that the crab carries, for example. So going on more with the soul's desire in the fourth house, there also is this piece back to forming one's self-identity from the deep inside out. So it is to literally create oneself from one's own creative source. And I look at this as feeling oneself into being. And I don't think it's possible to really maturely go through this unless we're willing to really be with ourselves. And that's ultimately what that fourth house is about. And you think about the angle, the IC or the low heaven, it's the only angle in the chart that we don't need someone else to help us do. You know, on the first house or the AC, I mean, we have to have something to project our self-image upon. And the descendant, of course, we need people to interact with in relationships. And the 10th house, we need a world, you know, to put our public image and our career self out there. But the fourth, the IC down there, ultimately is within oneself. So Pluto in the fourth house individuals have been coming from a place of deep desire to be strong within oneself. And so this feeling oneself into being comes from spending time in the, less tangible intellectual places within oneself. The feelings or the images or just the deep gut knowings that are there. So this experiencing one's emotional depth and inner workings, including hidden parts of self, and then to nurture them. But I don't think that we can form something until we have a relationship with it. And that fourth house ultimately is a relationship with my own psychological makeup. And then the soul's desire in the fourth as well is to nurture oneself, which naturally leads to nurturing life. And that's when Cancer in the fourth house archetype really, really is a great gift to the entire world. When it's learned to feed itself, it can then go out and really feed the whole world. And there's a million different ways to self-care and self-nurture. One doesn't have to I don't know. I think often if you think about self-care and self-nurture as someone who just spends all this time, in their own little bubble or whatnot. It doesn't have to be that way, but finding the natural things that keep us flowing and in touch with ourselves, that allows us naturally to kind of be that experience for others out there in the world. So we then create a home with deep bonds from which things can grow. And this home can be anywhere. It can be work, it can be in the midst of travel. It's not relegated to a traditional home house with family. But ultimately, the soul's desire with Pluto in the fourth house is to nurture something enough that something can grow from it. So we can think of a plant as an example. And this is why, for example, I think oftentimes Cancer individuals will have families or children or plants or pets, because there is that nature to nurture and grow something. But it doesn't need to be any of those things. It can be a project. It can be a creative endeavor. It can be any kind of thing. But it is the steps that take us deep enough that we can truly nurture and then let something grow on its own accord. So it takes time. So let's talk about some obsessions and compulsions with Pluto in the fourth house. Well, feeling into everything and everyone it is a huge piece here. And sometimes it's very difficult for these individuals to separate from their feelings or anybody else's feelings at all. And, oftentimes they're right, because there's a good gut sense with this placement, but not always. So it's important to develop some objectivity and ask some questions without automatically thinking that whatever vibe or energy or feeling you get automatically means something. Remember that fourth house is very reactive. It's learning what it feels like and what it is like to react to itself and to react to life. So this reactionary standpoint, it's not always accurate. It comes from a very subjective place still. So more obsessions and compulsions can be creating emotional dependencies for self and others. This can interweave all kinds of ways. Can be at the mercy of one's own emotions. In other words, the littlest thing happens. Someone says something a certain way, you feel a certain way, someone looks at you a certain way, someone doesn't do something, someone doesn't get what it is that you need. And then the wave becomes this ginormous storm, and then we can get stuck in that place. There can be overactive or shut down emotions. So I feel this back to the attraction repulsion complex that is part of Pluto. So oftentimes wherever Pluto sits or whatever it touches, so by aspect or placement, that we're dealing with attraction and repulsion, right? We want the thing, we're disgusted by the thing. And so this is true also, I think, with Pluto in the fourth when it comes to emotionality. And this can be our reaction to ourselves or to others. So oftentimes you find these individuals completely emotional, and other times they will shut that off completely as a safety mechanism. So there can be, a push and pull there. Definitely, there's always an aspect of wanting to stay a baby. And it's interesting because there's pieces for me with Saturn in the fourth as well. And staying a baby isn't always look like a baby. Oftentimes there is overcompensation with trying to take care of people in ways that don't have healthy boundaries, and in doing so, focus on someone else's needs or nurturing and not nurturing our own. It certainly can also be the other way around as well, but I want to emphasize that staying a baby doesn't always look like a baby. Sometimes it looks like an overdeveloped parent. But this underneath, deep underneath, whether one is acting it out or not, there is like this deep feeling that I don't want to, or I shouldn't have to take responsibility for maturing and growing up. And oftentimes in the fourth house, the feeling is someone should be doing something for me. I'm not getting something that I need. Someone's not feeling into what I need. Because that's the thing with the fourth house Pluto as well, or with the Cancer archetype in general, is those of us who are very Cancerian, tend to think that people should feel what we need and automatically deliver that. And that just doesn't work that way in life most of the time. So another go-to for Pluto in the fourth house is manipulating to keep the emotional tank full and to get one's own needs met. And we all manipulate. I mean, that's just what we do as humans, manipulating all kinds of ourselves and others and situations. All it means to me is just changing what is, because we're more comfortable with something else. But emotionally manipulating for Pluto in the fourth is important, because that fourth house Pluto wants to feel okay. So even though there's an attraction sometimes to feeling somewhat emotionally wrecked, there is also a barometer of I'm okay if I'm feeling okay. And so it can be very easy to, for example, say certain things, reach out and do certain things that generate a feeling response or an emotional response from someone else that makes us feel like, okay, we're okay. Emotional attachments of all kinds can be to people, can be to things. Fourth house in Cancer typically are emotional hoarders. And with Pluto there, they can add an additional compulsion or obsession to really want to hold on to things that have emotional memory. And this is important because the fourth house has a lot to do with our memory, and memory is it's not a factual thing. Memory is really stored in what our emotional experience was of things. So these emotional attachments in some ways are to feelings, not to real things or not to real people. And there's no problem with that, but it's important that we know what it is that we're doing. That's a much healthier place, especially working with Pluto in the fourth house, would be to recognize our emotional attachments for what they are, and not make them about a particular person, for example. That's a healthy way to have some objectivity around it. So caretaking of or from others in place of emotional intimacy and in avoidance of taking care of oneself. The key to me here is in place of emotional intimacy, because Pluto in the fourth house, any strong, difficult signatures in the fourth house show wounds and fears and mistrust of emotional intimacy, but yet we want emotional intimacy. So again, this is kind of back to the attraction repulsion. I don't really want this emotional intimacy because it doesn't feel safe to me, and I don't want to be vulnerable, right? So where Pluto is, generally we don't want vulnerability, but at the same time, we feel a big lacking in that area. We want emotional connection. So the most human way to approach that or work with it is to try to come up with something that fits the bill. And so caretaking is an example of something that oftentimes does that for people, or being taken care of, either way. And, it's a surrogate for true emotional intimacy. And, whatever it takes us to get where we need to go, is, in my mind, no problem with any of these things, but being conscious and aware of what we do and why we do it gives us more choices, which has been really empowering for me with all my stuff in the fourth house in Cancer, which at times I feel very immature in my emotions and how they can really take over my sense of reality. You know, how I feel starts to become some big thing, and I have to rein it back in and say, hey, wait a second, this is really about my reacting. It might not be true. And sometimes just that is enough to get me a little more grounded. So another thing that can happen with Pluto in the 4th house is choosing people who do not have the capacity to meet your needs, or choosing other people whose needs you don't have the capacity to meet. So this perpetuates this lack of, I can't nurture. I can't give this person what they really need to grow. You know, a good example would be getting involved in a relationship with someone and really wanting to nurture and grow them into the best form of who they are, but yet either you are so broken in your own emotional needs you can't really be there for the true person, or the other person is so broken in their own needs that you're offering something that they aren't able to receive. And these are the kinds of dynamics that happen a lot with Pluto in the 4th house and with Cancer in general. So we set ourselves up in some ways to prove the lack, which, you know, we love to do that in life. We love to take what we think is wrong with us, or what we don't have enough of, or what's not good enough, and we love to prove it to be, you know, to be right. And this is an example of what we can do. Well, see, you know, I give of myself, and you know, I do all these things I can, and you know, it's still not enough, and I still don't have emotional intimacy, or I'm still not feeling good about this, or you know, I'm attracting people to take care of me, and why no matter whatever they do, I don't feel I'm taken care of. You know, maybe they're taking care of a whole bunch of things for me, but ultimately on some level, I'm not feeling taken care of. And that's actually the whole point of this experience. So, because nothing will. But sometimes we have to experience so many examples of how the outside world won't take care of us, or make us feel okay, or well, any of these things, to push us back in to say, okay, then either I'm not going to get it, or I'm going to do it for myself. Kept in family dynamics, and you know, I have a number of people really close to me with Pluto in the 4th house, and this is always true for them. Even if they've ejected themselves from their family, the dynamics live on. So whether or not they say, I'm moving halfway across the world, I'm not going to talk to my family anymore because they make me crazy, there's always something about the family dynamic that stays. So there's oftentimes this tight tether that keeps them bound to the needs of family members. I experienced many people with this placement that they become the emotional support for someone, or someone's in their family. Sometimes even the child becomes the support for the parent. There is this being sucked into others' feelings and emotional experiences. So the tendency to lose oneself in someone else's emotional needs is very great here. So this note I put in here because I feel that it's really important, because oftentimes we view this as, oh my God, you know, I'm being taken over, I'm being totally sucked in, or if it's the other side of the dynamic, maybe we're aware that we're totally sucking someone else into what we need, but we may not be fully acknowledging it. But Pluto in the 4th wants this, and liking these experiences actually has nothing to do with it, because Pluto in the 4th wants these. It wants these so that it gets uncomfortable enough that it actually will do something different within itself. So it wants to feel stuck, and it wants to be manipulating and manipulated in needing and feeling needed, because it's actually creating something strong enough to react to. So back to my theory that the 4th house has so much to do with our reaction. So in the 4th house, Pluto is actually creating something strong enough to react to. It's creating a reaction. And to the extent that we're not getting it, you know, we may have to build something bigger and bigger, but that reaction ultimately is going to push us back into ourselves. So there can be an addiction to the overwhelming power, and I put in parentheses here, given to. You know, the overwhelming power of emotion, or the power that we give to emotion. In other words, you know, my emotions are overtaking me. You know, I can't think rationally. I can't function. You know, it's taking me down. You know, I know for myself with my own fourth house Cancer stuff, there are moments where I recognize that I'm lost in the emotion. You know, and I have several choices there. But when I recognize that I am, and I can recognize that it is my reaction, sometimes the best I can do is just hang out there. Hang out until, you know, that wave subsides a little bit, because oftentimes the tendency can be to, especially with the fourth house, there's a cardinality to it, that it will want to act on the feeling or the emotion. And ultimately, you know, being a yin sign, that's about on the inside, but we're not oftentimes comfortable with that, so we push out. So I think part of the challenge here is, I'm feeling this huge amount of emotion. How much more can I go in and deep with it, you know, with myself? Also, being attracted to and repulsed by one's own and others' dark psychological nature. So, right, the fourth house is our psyche. So it's all the stuff in there, not just the stuff that we like to acknowledge. It's all of it. And so Pluto has an attraction and a repulsion to things. So especially the more taboo areas within ourselves and others, there can be a tendency to really want to get in there. You know, Pluto in the fourth oftentimes can uncover psychological complexes in people. You know, it's not uncommon that someone through their partnerships or relationships or whatnot can oftentimes pull out in someone else things that they've suppressed. And, you know, because there can be a real mastery here, or a real power around working in the psyche, you know, in what I call like the language of images and feelings. But these things that we oftentimes identify as dirty, disgusting, secret, abusive, manipulative, criminal, destructive, and ruthless, those parts can be very attractive to Pluto in the fourth. And then at the same time, once you start poking into yourself or someone else, this, you know, now all of a sudden, you know, it disgusts me happens. So there definitely is that dynamic. So Pluto is power, and the fourth house power is the core of what we are and where we come from. So we're not likely to trust this, the innate power that we come from and what we are. So this is kind of like, this is the juice of Pluto in the fourth ultimately. You know, what's in me? Like, what did I come with? Like, and someone with this Pluto placement, you know, are going to keep kicking around in this space. So I feel like with that fourth house, it's like playing in those waters until you finally hit some ground. And that's where the empowerment happens. You know, I think about emotional self-sufficiency like a great blue heron, that it stands in the water and it roots itself down into the ground, and it's very solid and it's hunting on its own. So I feel like that's an image that works for me when I feel how I am standing in my own nature. You know, I can let my reactions and emotions move, you know, as I do, as is the nature of anything in the fourth house or Cancer. But I can be rooted through it or in the center of it, so that I and it doesn't throw me, you know, off every which direction. I really think that Pluto in the fourth house, I know that my teacher Laura Nalbandian said that she thinks probably the most difficult Pluto placement. And I think what comes along with being the most difficult placement would be one of the most important placements for literally coming into oneself with strength. And so anyone who has chosen or choosing this archetype has really wanted to get into themselves. You have to really feel and become who they are, and to find the power that comes from being in that space. All right, let's move on to perceived lack. Actually, does anyone have any questions? Maybe I should stop. It's about 5:20. Does anyone have anything they want to add? Anybody with Pluto in the fourth have something that you feel should be heard? No? Okay, I'm going to move on. Perceived lack. Lacking emotional safety and security, and a fear of emotional abandonment. So even if someone's home life seemed to meet all their needs, and oftentimes this is the case, is that this does not always mean that there's a completely destructive, upbringing or parental relationship, although it certainly can. Regardless, there is a lack of emotional safety and security, which might just mean it's not safe for me to be me, not safe for me to feel my feelings, not safe for me to express my feelings. And so this triggers a fear of emotional abandonment, which triggers patterns of not being strong to one's own emotional nature, and not feeling comfortable being vulnerable in that space. Also, there's a perceived lack of unable to meet one's own emotional self-sufficiency, which can be really difficult in this placement. The feeling that I just don't feel good enough. I can't seem to feel okay. And this feeling of knowing that one is going to external sources to fill it up just perpetuates a sense of lack, right? Oh, I only feel okay when I'm with my family, or when I'm with people who treat me a certain way, or when I'm in my house safe with my own stuff, or when I'm eating these particular foods, or when I'm indulging in my blank addiction, right? Whatever it is, perpetuates the feeling that without this thing, I'm not okay. Cancer in the fourth house are ruled by the moon, and to me the moon is like our okay barometer. Am I okay? So this fourth house is really trying to find a strength in itself to be okay no matter what the circumstances are. But it's generally the opposite that we live through before we ever come to the sense of that place. So in addition, there is a lack of emotional connection, or feeling that there's a lack of emotional connection. It can be a feeling of lack in one's own emotionality, like maybe I feel like I'm just not emotionally available, or I'm not emotional enough, or my emotions aren't sensitive or deep enough, or simply a lack of emotional experience. I'm not feeling connected the way I want to emotionally. The fourth house in Cancer wants to feel someone, wants to feel emotionally connected. Same as when it comes to books or movies or art. Like with the fourth house in Cancer, if you don't feel it, or if I don't feel you and you don't feel me, it's like it's almost a turnoff. It's like the fourth house in Cancer feels like it knows something or someone by having a feeling or emotional connection with it. So sometimes Pluto here can feel like there's something not right about that, or I'm not getting enough of that. And oftentimes that's because of a self-protectiveness that's not allowing vulnerability to truly have that, but one sees it more of a not meeting the right person, not having the right situation. Mom and dad didn't do the right thing. I'm not getting those needs met, instead of recognizing that I'm not open or available to have that kind of connection. So therefore, no matter what I attract, whether or not it's available, I'm not available. To me, that fourth house has a lot to do about being emotionally available. So for example, I keep feeding and feeding and I'm still hungry. That's like the image of, the baby bird gobbling down food and it never gets enough, right? It's never satiated. So these experiences can lead to eating and drinking, for example, as a way to temporarily and artificially emotionally satiate. Us Cancers and fourth house people oftentimes are very emotional eaters. We're looking for that something that feels like nurturing, whether or not we think we want to. It's down there on some level. So there's almost always trauma and drama with family, home, roots of origin, which can present in different ways. There are as with Pluto, no matter where it's placed, we deal with power and control dynamics. So in this case, we're dealing with family, home, roots, emotions, psychological issues. So in this area, the power and control dynamics can be very strong, often forming these really tight entanglements, but the individual with Pluto in the 4th house, despite trying to get something, like they just can't ever satiate their emotional needs, is one example of how this can present. Or the emotional undercurrents and intensity literally drain someone of their vital life force and energy. So this can be the example of where mother or father is or was emotionally controlling or manipulating. So maybe mom or dad's needs, or someone else in the family, someone's needs were so overwhelming, and even if they didn't state it, like articulate it, like the deep feeling of like, it's almost like, because Cancer oftentimes does not articulate with words everything, but you can feel it. It's like just this feeling that there's boundaries being crossed, or no boundaries whatsoever. So this can literally drain an individual. This can also be true Pluto in the 4th, and to some extent the other water houses as well. Just life kind of drains you, takes you over, whether you recognize it or not. Like everybody else's stuff, everyone else's feelings, you just soak it in like a sponge, unable to have any delineation between you and that energy. So maybe also sometimes I find that the family moved often. So they maybe did everything else great, but they were in different houses so often that the individual never felt the stability, and therefore had a longing for like this nostalgic family that never leaves a house for a whole lifetime, for example, or someone who makes childhood friends and keeps them forever. Oftentimes these dynamics come up with Pluto in the 4th house. And emotional and psychological pathologies are very common in family members, and also in family members of our own created families as well. So it's not just our genetic families, but anybody that we consider to be our family. But these emotional and psychological pathologies are very common. There can also be a perceived lack of a happy and nurturing connection with ancestral roots and the biological family or bloodline. So there also can be potential family drama going way back. Some of the individuals that I know with Pluto in the 4th house, they have ongoing lawsuits, issues with money and land and held things that go back to other countries and different places, and that continues to be a burden and a trauma for people to this day. And so we also can see adoption is also common in this, or adoption of a family member, some loss of continuity in genetics, so that there's kind of always this, where do I belong? Because again, remember, Pluto in the 4th house has the ultimate deepest desire to form an identity with and from oneself. So the not being able to say, this is where I come from, this is who I am based on my family or my background or my nationality, is actually helpful to push oneself in and say, okay, there's something that goes deeper down here. Sometimes these people spend a lot of time searching for their ancestors, searching for connections, trying to do family trees, these kinds of things can be a big interest in this. Lacking of nurturing or mothering or emotional support in some way. So this can be that the parent was very emotionally present, but created more of a dependency than support. And this one can be tricky because we don't always see it right away. So this would create a great need placed on the child. And while there might be big open lines of emotional communication and a lot of feelings shared, sometimes what can happen is the person with this placement of Pluto in the 4th house can feel in some ways very emotionally put upon, almost responsible for someone else's emotional well-being, as though somehow they were expected to magically make things okay, or provide a connection that perhaps that other person wasn't getting. Sometimes we see this in parents who don't have an emotionally intimate relationship, and so one parent turns to the child or the children. Any dynamic this can be. I'm just giving some examples here. But the compensation for this oftentimes is taking care of others by providing their emotional support, becoming the parent, perhaps even to the parent. So we have a tendency in life in general, we're not getting something to try to make that thing happen. And oftentimes we try to make it happen outside of us. And in this case, make it happen for someone else. So it's interesting. Sometimes you can see someone with this placement who will have, let's say they may have a lot of dependencies on their family. They may have not ever fully grown up or matured in their own family, but yet they may play a role of a parent or a parental figure in other people in their lives. So like recreating the dynamic, but just bending it in a different direction. And these are the sorts of things with Pluto in the fourth that we see, because we're recreating the dynamics, whether they're forwards or backwards of what they were. So some examples of perceived lack dialogue. No one is feeling what I need and responding. I shouldn't have to ask for this. Others should automatically feel what I need. I better feel what others need. This one's important, right? Because sometimes Pluto in the fourth, if they don't feel that they're feeling what others need, they get very uncomfortable and nervous. They want to know that there's some level of control, Pluto, around emotions, fourth house, right? And emotions are unpredictable. We can't define them. They don't make sense. So we're in a world where, as long as we're trying to do that, we're perpetuating truly our own drama. So if I feel what they need and I give it to them, maybe I will get my needs met. At least I will feel needed. And if I'm needed, I won't be abandoned. And you can, twirl these words lots of different ways. But to me, this kind of gets to the heart of what's going on oftentimes unconsciously in the behavior of Pluto in the fourth house. So another, I'm keeping my neediness secret. No one should know how needy I really am. I don't even want to feel how needy I am. It might be impossible to have my needs met, and there might be no end to my neediness. I find this one is huge and usually hidden. And this is the key. If we're willing to feel how needy we really believe we are, something changes. Because what we thought it was is a reaction or something that we're making up. And when we actually sit in there and feel it, feel how needy we are, it's true, something starts to shift. Doesn't mean the world miraculously gets perfect, or we move to happy land or something, but there's a sense of empowerment in just knowing that we can be comfortable in our neediness, and that feeling that we need something doesn't mean we have to take an action to go about getting something. And to me, that's liberating. And to me, liberating is linked into empowerment. So in this house, this placement, me being with me, feeling how needy I may be, how immature I may be, how emotionally driven I may be, how reactive I may be, despite what my brain wants to tell me or my higher spirit wants to tell me, this is where I get to really know me. And then the motivation to act starts to come from a different place. Instead of trying to fill up the gap, it becomes this is what I'm working with, and how can I develop it into something else, and then truly go about meeting my own needs, which are probably pretty different than I perceive them to be just based on my sense of lack. So Pluto wants to get to the bottom line, and in the fourth house, the bottom line is the deepest core of our psychological and emotional nature and needs. So what does it really take to empower ourselves to feed our ego? And we're not going to know until we're in it. So some of these things like spiritual bypass, where we're going to transcend the ego and move on, we're leaving ourselves out of the equation. This placement is about really feeling our ego and feeling our ego needs and the drives around it, so that we can empower ourselves to feed it. And once it's fed, we can use it in a new way. And that's where, it's a whole different talk, but I get excited around that point. But until we get to that point, like when the ego is not fed, and by feeding the ego, I don't mean the stroke on the back kind of feed the ego. I mean truly learning to feed the ego when it's fed and it's not starving. The decisions and actions we make are really different. Because when we come from a place of starving, we make crazy decisions, and they're not necessarily in line with what we truly want. And what does Pluto want? To get to the bottom line, to get to the deep will, the soul's deepest power. But we've got to work with the ego. So it's in the ego's house, right? It's wanting to work with it. So we have to intimately know the nature of our ego, which means we have to feel it even at the risk of being swept away or under by it. This can be lots of shadow work. This can be sitting in our darkness. That can be journeying with your dark man or your dark woman, whatever you like to call that. But this is getting into the guts of what's in there. So it no longer is a shadow, it becomes integrated. And if we believe we lack a strong, stable self without healthy boundaries, easily succumbing to dependency, we will stay a big baby in one way or another. And we will attract all kinds of experiences that will force us to confront our own big baby until we start acting like a mature adult. And I don't think the jump is to acting like a mature adult sometimes is accepting that we are a big baby. Like, that's a really adult thing to do. So we create this crisis with Pluto, right? So we create family drama oftentimes. And the fourth house is also associated with land or the ground, including the quality of the ground, which I think is interesting because we can look at even the nature of our own property. Like, what's the land like that I'm living on? There's an association with the fourth house with that. The structures on it, homeland, inheritances. So turmoil in these areas is common. And the turmoil in these areas, it's going to naturally trigger emotions and different emotional connections. So again, there's almost no way. I mean, think about going home with family for the holidays. What does it do? It puts us right into our childhood reactive emotional self. It just naturally does it. It's supposed to do it. So all these things are triggering the exact muscle that just needs to be, built up. Also, there could be creative crisis with the human process because there could be drama around the most vulnerable stages of life. So the fourth house is associated with the beginnings and endings of things, which includes our old age and death and dying. So, we talk about coming in as an infant and going out as an infant. So the fourth house triggers those vulnerabilities of being human. It's another reason why I feel like the fourth house is like maybe most representative of just the human experience and the vulnerability and frailty of truly like being in our body and having a reaction to our body. Parental issues, so oftentimes these individuals are forced to grow up or not allowed to grow up. So it can be either to hidden agendas, power struggles, emotional reactions. There can be tons of drama around these reactions, your reactions to things that are happening, regardless of what the intent or the facts are. This is all about reactions to the feelings that come up around the events that happen. And also crisis around, we talked about earlier, absorbing everything and not filling up one's own space with self. So no boundaries, not taking responsibility for oneself, oftentimes until the person falls apart. And there can be struggling with one's own emotional nature, which could include depression and a feeling of homelessness within. That fourth house, it wants to belong. Cancer wants to belong. Okay, so the creative crisis, I'll be safe to be me if I feel safe in my environment. That's a good fourth house Cancer little phrase, which leads directly to controlling the environment or to those in my environment or to how I'm reacting to my environment. Or if I'm needed, I'm okay. And this also includes being needy as a form of being needed. And all of this requires a tremendous amount of internal and external monitoring and control. And with Cancer in fourth house, it's often passive aggressive. There's no room left for healthy vulnerability or trust, and self-protection becomes a barrier to intimacy and connection, which is really what the fourth house is wanting within oneself and then naturally with others. So these patterns and beliefs will be threatened to force growth. The self will create crises to power itself up emotionally. And so lastly, in our last few minutes, so Pluto in the fourth house, that's been the soul's desire, the previous soul's desire. So by polarity point, this is the current soul's desire, where one is moving to integrate the fourth with. So we're not leaving where Pluto is behind, we are looking to integrate the two. And in this case, we're looking to integrate the Cancer archetype with the Capricorn archetype. So what we're learning with this polarity is the wisdom of knowing our space, owning it, and filling it up. Because actually, once you own your space, I mean, when you're solid in yourself and you belong to yourself and you fill that space up, you don't have to set external boundaries. You already have boundaries. That's kind of the magical thing of filling up our space. Like when we fill up our space, people naturally know it. So taking responsibility for oneself, setting limits and goals, and working to achieve them. And with Capricorn, it's accountability and responsibility, which for me is accounting for what's mine and then responding, which are things that in the fourth house Cancer archetype, oftentimes we're not wanting to do so much. So this is the, now that I've sat with myself and I'm really feeling what I'm made of in my deepest, darkest space and my own psychological makeup and my own sense of family and belonging, now I can really account for what's me, and now I can respond moving out into the world in a more mature way. And I can let others take care of themselves. So this is a huge lesson in emotional objectivity, because that fourth house is all reactionary, right? It's all happening to me, about me. Now the 10th house, I actually see the entire viewpoint, you know, from the mountaintop. It's not just about me. I see more. And that's what is happening in the learning from the 10th house, moving towards the 10th house, to actually take charge of one's life. So growing up and learning to parent oneself, finding an independent role out in society so that we're actually taking what the identity that we form in the fourth house, and then we're actually making that, putting it to work out there in the world, you know, making it useful. Okay, that's it for slides. Does anybody have anything? We have a minute.
Okay, Tara, could you please stop sharing?
Yep.
Oh, good, thank you. Any questions, anyone, or comments?
Can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
It's Wendy. That was fantastic.
Hi, Wendy.
I didn't know if I was going to be here or not, but I'm glad that I got to hear it. And of course, I recorded it later. But it's pretty right on, a lot of it. The only thing I thought about in the beginning about the I see and that, you know, you don't need anybody else, sort of.
Yeah.
I think for the emotional, for the Pluto to be triggered, though, you really do need others, right?
Well, yeah, we need something to react to. It's true.
Yeah, yeah. And oh my God, it's kind of funny because I've gone through these cycles of like being like stuck in my fourth house
Me
and
too.
catapulted into my 10th and really, really living there. I mean, I have a Capricorn moon, Saturn in the 10th. I mean, you saw my chart.
Yes.
You know, and then catapulted back into my fourth, and I just had my Chiron return, and wow, I have been learning a lot about myself. So it's pretty intense.
Wendy, do you think, because at least my experience with my fourth house stuff is it's slow to grow, like, you know, they say fourth house stuff tends to be second half or later in life. So what's your experience been with that?
Well, God, I don't know. I think I have Uranus there, you know, in the fourth. So
Yeah.
mine is really set up for some major evolution in this life, like
Yeah.
do it or die. And I don't know. I think I've gone through stages of being very mature and then being very emotionally immature. I mean, I have both, and I think I get tossed back and forth between both.
Mhm.
Because in the last couple years, I've definitely felt like a big baby. And I'll be 52 this summer. So, I don't know. I think it's a spiral, right? It's back, and for me, it's
Yeah.
a dance. And I have been in situations where I've given away my power, and then I'm slammed back down into the fourth, and feel like a total victim because I have that Virgo there, like
Mhm.
all the post-traumatic stress and all the drama and all the trauma. But I will say yesterday, my father had surgery the other day, and I was in the room with him before he went in, and he started talking about something, and I felt super triggered. I felt I felt emotionally shocked and shutting down. And I was like really upset about it for a day, and then I was talking with some friends of mine, and I realized, like, I don't have to go there. I could just see him as another soul who's trying to work on this stuff and see him. I was like back into Pisces. I was back into my
Mhm.
taking responsibility and letting it go and not even giving it any more energy. And it was gone. Yeah. But I need the reflection sometimes because I can't see it. Depending on how much. That was really good. I'm going to re-listen to it probably numerous times. Thank you.
Well, I'm glad you were here. I wish you could have shared more because your chart's interesting. and I, just like you, I need reflection too. Because I'm 42, but I tell you what, I feel like I'm only just now separating from my parents the way kids do when they leave for college. So
yeah. Well, we have a couple fourth house Plutos here. We could have
Olive too. She could jump right in.
we could have a discussion.
I could, but because there was only 1 minute and I tend to ramble, I stay silent. I'm like, oh, well, I'll say something, but then I'm like, no, I'll just keep rambling.
We love it.
And
We
I want
love
it.
it.
Yeah.
Anyway, any final comments? And then we'll wind down.
Thank you, everyone.
Okay, thank
That
you
was
so
great,
much.
Tara.
That was wonderful, Tara. I could relate to every single bit of it. It was amazing. Thank you so much. And
Thank you, guys.
everybody, would you all please thank Tara All?
Thank you, Tara. That was awesome. I totally have identified with a lot of it too.
It's good to have family.
I'm off to find a bowl of ice cream.
I'm gonna have a glass of wine, I think.
Bye-bye.
Bye, everybody.
Tara.